wanted to thank Ingrid for this portrait of Toki, Lolita. Carly already pointed out that she has pretty good teeth. Ingrid says she has one, maybe two damaged teeth, maybe three, but most of them are really good. She is competent to clomp down on a fish without a problem. First I want to get you up to date on the Lolita campaign, on what's going on. There's a lot of dynamic action going on. On June 1st, our suit against the Seaquarium for violations of the Endangered Species Act was dismissed without trial on the grounds that the Animal Welfare Act supersedes the ESA for animals in captivity, and that there is no violation of the ESA unless it can be shown that Lolita is not just harmed or harassed, as the law says, but she must be under grave threat to her survival. So we are appealing, the legal team, Toki's legal team is appealing, and I believe that she is indeed under grave threat to her survival, but that the ESA does not require that she be under grave threat to her survival to qualify as being harmed and harassed, and that the ESA should supersede the weak AWA anyway. So the judge just seemed to want to throw it out without trial, and she did. So we are appealing, but that could take another year before there's any kind of decision on the appeal. Toki's legal team is also suing the USDA again on the Animal Welfare Act, on the lax enforcement, because they issued a license to the new owner, Palace Entertainment, and you can't transfer a license, but they did anyway. So we just launched a suit, the team, I'm named in it too, launched a suit against the USDA again on the grounds of the violations of the Animal Welfare Act. Since 2011, Toki's legal team has launched a long list of suits to apply whatever legal leverage is possible to mandate her return to her home and family. And we aren't giving up. This team is determined. But given the delays in the court of law, we're back to where we've really always been, which is to argue the case for her in the court of public opinion. And in that court, thanks in large part to a big, powerful documentary film we're all very familiar with, and numerous books and blogs and articles about orca captivity, and many beautiful songs and artwork from people of all ages, of all kinds, and the educational value of the steady stream of legal actions, and thousands upon thousands of dedicated campaigners all over the world, we're winning. We are winning public opinion. The whole attitude is shifting back. There are signs everywhere you look. Orca captivity is going out of style. And dolphin and marine mammal and other large mammals in captivity is soon to follow. And Rachel Carberry's video of the Empty the Tanks demonstrations around the world, that is so heartwarming and encouraging, and just shows you again, it's everywhere. We don't have attendance figures for the Seaquarium, but the stock price of a once powerful company called SeaWorld is in the dumpster, despite massively expensive advertising, primetime advertising, I'm sure you've seen it too, and greenwashing, and everything, every trick they can think of, promising not to captive breed anymore, and yet their stock is at an all-time low down there, pretty near anyway. They were at 13 something at one point, but they just can't bring it up to where it was before August of 2014, when the first returns after Blackfish came out, and it dropped 30, 40, 50%, and it has stayed at that bottom ever since. So they can't get their stock going again. But protests are taking place all the time. There's a steady drumbeat every weekend at the Seaquarium, and a group called Shutdown Palace is holding demonstrations at many of the 40 or so water parks of various kinds operated in the US by Palace Entertainment. And in the UK, at the office of Orca Capital, which is the investment house that owns the corporation that owns Palace Entertainment, this amazing street theater demonstration was held April 1st, and many thanks to Margot and Liz of Marine Connection and graphic designer extraordinaire Joe Phillips for doing a street demonstration that was so eye-catching and entertaining and informative that it generated a story in the London Sunday Times about Lolita that held these investors, these bowler-hatted British investors, responsible for Lolita's captivity, right there in the headline. So we're making a lot of progress in a lot of areas. And the portfolio at Orca Capital that includes the Seaquarium and Marine Land and Friends and other dolphinariums around the world and a lot of water parks is steadily losing value. That's so far this year. It may be because they're selling tickets to people to watch enslaved whales and dolphins do circus tricks. That's going out of style. Those days are rapidly ending, and those companies will have to adapt. We just have to get the whales and dolphins in captivity out of those misery pits. And the next captive orca to return could be Morgan, it could be Kiska, but it could be Toki. Her retirement home is in an ideal location. It's just absolutely perfect. It needs only infrastructure and personnel. We have no time frame on when this might happen to begin installing or hiring, nor do we have budget, but that would all happen anytime we get a green light. And we are collaborating with the designer and builder and engineer of Keiko Seapen to make sure that our plan is safe and sound. And we have a 40-some-odd page plan and many appendices on the web if you'd like to look at any of the details. So now, I'm going to get all sciencey and theoretical.
Well, tell us how deep it is.
I'm sorry?
How deep is it? How deep?
Oh, how deep is it?
Yeah, it's just.
Oh, okay. Well, it's about 50 feet, depending on the tide,
Yeah.
average tide. Yeah, I mean,
All right.
yeah, it's huge.
Okay.
I mean, compared to 48 by 80,
It's excellent.
not even, yeah. So, science. This is sort of about science, about our scientific understanding. It's also about getting to know the orcas that live here, about getting to know them better, understanding them better. And as Rachel Carberry pointed out, that's how activists get their information. That's how we know what we know. That's how policymakers change society. So the science is really important. So what I'd like to do now is explain why I am confident that Toki can readapt, can remember how to act, and will thrive in her home waters. In a word, sociology. Nobody saw that coming. Sociology is the scientific study of the development, structure, and functioning of human society. Sociology studies human cultural behavior. And since about 1920 in the context of Darwinian evolutionary theory. Included in sociology is the study of taboos. That's how matriarchs rule. Taboos are behavior or language that is forbidden. Taboos are learned from others, may be encoded in laws, written or unwritten, or maybe unspoken. One taboo for sociologists themselves is to never apply any theories or concepts used in sociology to describe the behavior of any non-human animals. Early sociologists made it clear they believed only humans had the capacity for culture or for shared meanings or symbolic interactions of any kind, which is understandable because until the results of field studies began to come in on residents and transient orcas and other types worldwide, in just the past 3 decades, there was almost no evidence of any non-humans capable of creating cultures anything like human cultures. But now there is. In 2001, Hal Whitehead and Luke Rendell wrote this in a paper called Culture in Whales and Dolphins. The complex and stable vocal and behavioral cultures of sympatric groups of killer whales, that's in the same habitat, appear to have no parallel outside humans and represent an independent evolution of cultural faculties. Wow. That was a breakthrough paper that equated orca cultures to human cultures. I thought that might get the attention of some sociologists, but as far as I know, no sociologist has written about orca societies. UCSD sociologist Susan Davis has written about SeaWorld's ability to define orcas for public consumption, but not about how the orcas define themselves. But they do define themselves. And that may be the key to understanding orca cultures and pretty much the full range of orca behavior. Self-definition and self-determination are sociological concepts, but sociologists won't talk about orcas being capable of those things because they aren't human. And most cetologists won't say much about self-definition and cultural identity in orcas because those are not biological concepts. It's generally taboo for cetologists to borrow ideas from sociology to talk about the social behavior or cultures of whales. But there are exceptions. Last month, a paper about sympatric sperm whale clans was published, showing that cultural identity is important in this species, in both the North Atlantic and the Pacific. The paper showed that sympatric vocal sperm whale cultures do exist, and that their genetic signatures track their cultural identities almost perfectly. Media reports on that paper clarified that the authors are saying sperm whales use language. So that's an example of cetologists drawing from at least pop sociology to talk about whale behavior. And orca researchers have established that cultural learning and behavior can lead to genetic differences. Once again, the media is more willing to state the obvious. Orca evolution is driven by their cultures. So this begs a looming scientific question: how to explain the cultural diversity and the sympatric speciation in orcas? This is one of the most pressing problems in cetology today, but cetologists don't consult sociology to help solve that problem, and sociologists won't step up to contribute any ideas from their field of study. So there's this gap. It's not a wall, because a wall would be visible, no matter who pays for it. Oh, sorry. Got that. It's a chasm. It's a chasm that's invisible, a vast abyss between sociological knowledge about how human societies develop and function and the biological community who are trying to figure out how orca societies develop and function. Sociologists and biologists won't talk to each other. They're like residents and transients. So we're going to leap across that chasm right here, right now, because it's impeding progress in both sociology and biology. It would be amazing for sociologists to study a mammal other than humans that has also evolved advanced cultural capabilities, living almost entirely according to learned meanings and traditions, mediated by languages, a self-aware, self-defining species that over the eons has found its own solutions for how to live consciously on planet Earth, how to cooperate to find food and use habitat, and has created a wide array of complex and sometimes competing societies, almost entirely without violence or aggression, either within or between communities. But I don't see any sociologists going there. And cetologists might turn to sociology to help solve their problems, especially the extreme cultural diversity and speciation found among orca populations. It's a problem cetologists are actively working on recent papers have proposed two theories. One paper proposes that historical dietary limitations resulted in long-term isolation between populations, and then culture took over to keep them apart. Another paper suggests glacial cycles led to specialized behaviors in specific populations before culture took over to keep them apart. But neither theory really accounts for the wide variety of mutually exclusive orca cultures worldwide, often in the same habitats, for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years. Sociology might have some insights or theories to approach this vexing question. Sometimes our words hinder our understanding of what is happening in the natural world. Consider the word ecotype. We've all heard it. Ecotypes are categories of orca populations that are similar but different from other ecotypes in their prey selection, genetic makeup, and other parameters. It is a useful term to see the broad spectrum of orca cultures, but it's a very imprecise term. In 2011, Robert Pittman said, "The term ecotype then merely recognizes scientific uncertainty with regard to killer whale diversity, and until we know more about killer whale speciation, the term ecotype will remain a placeholder for a work in progress." From a sociological perspective, there are two problems with ecotype. First, the word implies and assumes an ecological or an environmental origin for the various types of orcas, like glacial events or dietary limitations as original causes. But those explanations don't account for the multitude of completely distinct cultures of orcas found in all oceans. What's been keeping them apart all these millennia? Another problem with ecotype is that it lumps communities together that act alike in some ways, like northern and southern residents, into single ecotypes. But that doesn't account for the fact that they avoid each other like the plague, have completely different call repertoires, don't interbreed, and are on separate evolutionary tracks. The term ecotype obscures this essential distinction. And there's still no plausible theory to explain why there are residents and big whales or transients. For just one example, who are totally different behaviorally in every possible way, and yet they cross paths every day and are highly aware of each other, and biologically they could interbreed, but culturally they can't, because it would be taboo. Orcas have taboos too, lots of them, like the apparently universal taboo against harming humans, which is a very good thing. But remember, it's their choice every time. So how did that happen? And how does it continue happening? What are the behavioral mechanisms that keep each community absolutely cohesive and totally apart from all the others? I don't see any explanation for this extremely rare, if not unprecedented, propensity to form into highly diverse, mutually repellent communities made up of extended families, most having just a few hundred members. Of course, it was only 35 years ago or so that Mike Bigg and Ken and others documented that R's and T's were completely different populations of the same species in the same habitat. And I'm just going to take this opportunity to say we wouldn't know much at all about these whales if it wasn't for Ken's perseverance and skill and smarts over the last 40 years. It remains unheard of anywhere else in the wildlife biology, except to some extent among other cetaceans. But there's still no good explanation for how these different diverse populations can coexist in the same habitats. So to give you a sense of where I'm coming from, my BA degree is in, guess what? Sociology, from UC Berkeley and Colorado College. For the past 3.5 decades or so that I've been learning and writing and speaking about orcas, I've been quietly applying sociological perspectives to try to understand orcas. And it's helped me to see orca cultures since the early 80s. So at long last, I'd like to suggest some kind of collaboration or synthesis of sociology and cetology. I'd rather it came from a department chair at a major university to get some traction, but I've waited long enough. My hope for the future is to see sociologists and cetologists do lunch, or do a workshop, or a conference. It might give sociologists a new perspective on human cultures by comparing and contrasting with orca cultures. And it might provide some new ways to explain orca cultures. I'm not saying sociology could tell us exactly how orcas develop their communities, but they might start by seeing it as a given that orcas, millions of years ago, evolved the cognitive, the empathic, and the intellectual capacity to create their own social networks and traditions and form themselves into cohesive societies. Sociologists might look for trust-building rituals and behaviors that reinforce social bonds like greeting ceremonies or food sharing or any of the tactile, touchy-feely social behaviors we see so often out there, although not as often as we used to. Sociologists might look for precursors, believed to be necessary for humans to build cultures, especially the ability to communicate using symbols. They would probably investigate how orcas use language to share their traditions and cultural identities. Cetologists, however, generally seem to prefer not to discuss language or symbolism. In Culture in Whales and Dolphins, 15 years ago, the authors said, human culture is intimately linked to both language and symbolism, but there is currently no empirical basis for discussing the role or non-role of language and symbolism in cetacean culture. They established that they live in cultures. That was breakthrough, but they didn't really want to go any further and talk about how they do that. But to exist at all, cultural identities and a sense of self must be shared socially and remembered at all times. Belonging to a culture requires a high level of self-awareness and a theory of mind, continually assessing what's going on in the minds of others, and an assumption of personhood, of self and others, the capacity for agency or self-determination, and knowledge of your reference group, who you belong to, all held within the minds of each member and referred to with symbols. That's all straight out of sociology, but there's no reason to assume it doesn't also apply to orcas. The evidence is their cultures. You can't have complex, cohesive, long-lasting cultures without symbolic interaction. All of it has to be shared and continually reinforced or modified by a process called symbolic interaction, which is a robust subdiscipline within sociology. I actually took a class from that guy in 1966. He's as mean as he looks. What Bloomer says here is meant to apply only to humans, of course. But why would orcas not also act according to meanings learned from others? For instance, a Chinook salmon must mean one thing to a resident and something entirely different to a transient when they come across them, the same fish. Those are meanings that they learn culturally. Bloomer notes that behaviorism doesn't allow for interpretation between stimulus and response. Symbolic interactionism assumes that personal interpretation is constant and inevitable and essential to human social behavior. And I would add to orca behavior. They're always interpreting their world around them in those big brains. Bloomer lists 3 primary criteria required for humans to be capable of symbolic interaction. First is to have very large brains. I think Lori established that they have very big brains, and according to a recent paper, orcas may have the biggest brains on the planet. 2 is the animal must rely heavily on society. Orcas' lives are inextricably intertwined with their societies, and we also rely on our societies. In order to function in society, we not only have to use language, but our very thoughts are formed using our language, learned from others. So our behavior is inevitably coordinated with those with whom we interact, which seems to also be true for orcas. And to build cultures, an animal must be able to make a wide range of complex sounds. You've all heard orca chatter. To use as symbols. Check, check, and check. Humans and orcas fulfill all three criteria. Other animals may have very large brains, but may not rely on society to the extent that humans and orcas do. Or they may not be able to make a wide range of complex sounds. Sperm whales, for instance, seem to be limited to using a kind of Morse code to communicate their cultural identities. So sociologists might assume that orcas evolved self-consciousness as humans did, and at some point, possibly 10 million years ago, saw the benefit of forming into cohesive, mutually bonded, deeply trusting communities, and that they have the neurologic, empathic, and linguistic ability to do that. So they did. Orcinus orca may have developed and refined their cultures to a very high level. I don't want to put an ordering of who's highest, but providing stable, low-stress, safe, and satisfying social lives for all members in small, interrelated communities where everybody knows your name, that ensure plentiful nutrition as well as physical, mental, and emotional health for all. Maybe we could learn a thing or two from them. And that's why I believe Toki will know what to do if and when she's allowed to come home. To this day, she still calls out in the calls she learned before capture 46 years ago. She's still trying to communicate with her family after 46 years in captivity. She defined herself as a member of her family long before she was captured. And I believe she still knows who she is and how to act. Okay, well, now I've broken taboos in both sociology and ethology. And if I've offended anyone, I'm truly sorry. But you know what they say, if you see something, say something. So I'm just saying. Thank you. Was that a question? If you're not completely blown away and you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to entertain them. And if you do have any that you think of later, that's our email on the slide. Okay then, you're completely, oh, there's
I don't know if you have been interviewed yet by Darcy Stanky. Does that name ring a bell?
No.
I think she would be somebody who needs to learn from you. I met this woman at Line Film in May. She is a writer and has a contract from a very prestigious, big-name publishing company for a book on menopause. And she was out here researching orcas because apparently orcas are the only mammal other than humans who go through menopause. And she has a theory that it's sociological, that they are matriarchal and they need to be done with child raising so they can be leaders and teach and pass on knowledge. And so she seems to be thinking along your lines.
Yep.
And so it's one chapter, but it's going to be a big name book. So
If you can get me in touch, please do. I'd love to chat.
I have a question. How is it that, I don't know if it's called a pod, will eat the Chinook salmon and the other pod doesn't, primarily?
Right?
Why is
Well,
that?
they act completely differently. The residents eat them, the transients move right along. They don't bother with it at all. And the same is true conversely if it's a seal or a porpoise. Well, not entirely. Sometimes residents play with the porpoise, but I didn't really get the drift of your question.
Yeah, I'm just asking why do they do that? Why?
Well, that's the culture. That's what they learn when they're very young by all kinds of messages. We obviously don't know the full range of how they transmit their culture when they're young, but they basically grow up learning what to eat and what not to eat. And it's very strict and rigid, and it is a symbol of membership, and membership is everything. So they do not contradict the symbols.
Please use the microphone.
Sorry. Yeah, the question was, why do they see a fish differently if they're a resident or a transient? And it's how they were raised. It's what they learn from their elders as they grow up, and it's very strict and rigid, and you act appropriately at all times, basically, you know, within the range of what is permissible. They seem to be having fun out there a lot, so it's not like it's dismal, but it is very strict and channeled and rigid as far as what they can do in terms of mating, in terms of eating, foraging, association patterns, you know, who to hang out with, when to come and go, who you listen to. We don't have any idea, really, their range of behaviors and responses to each other out there, but it's all what they learn growing up, and they stick with it because they stay as members. Yes?
Yeah, Howard, do you think that, you know, the kinks and the Chinooks get lower and lower, and they, you know, they're having to like work really hard to catch one Chinook, and they got a school of silvers that go by there? They're not going to go, well, those are silver, those kids don't eat those silver.
Right.
Are they going to? Is it
Well,
gonna be strict?
that's a huge question. There have been workshops about that. The question is, if the Chinook gets smaller and scarcer, but a bunch of sockeye go by, are they going to change their menu so they'll have something to eat at least? And you know, I can't rule that out. There's, I would say, and I'm really in over my head. Ken should answer this one, but there's sort of competing lines of evidence. One is between 1995 and 2001, when the Chinook were drastically depleted, the mortalities went way up. They didn't switch. I don't know, there weren't a lot of other species of salmon around either, but there were halibut, there were other, you know, other possibilities for them to eat. They didn't, they died instead. But the other thing is, we really have a picture of their prey preferences only from the last 10 years or so. I mean, there's some, you know, anecdotal and other evidence from before that, but really a dedicated effort came out of the listing under the ESA in 2005 to find out what are they eating. So that's what we know is from that now 10-year period. And it's mainly Chinook, about 80% Chinook, and some coho in the summer, and some chum in the fall down in Puget Sound, Admiralty Inlet and Puget Sound. So that's a snapshot, 10 years. We don't know if 40, 50, 100 years ago, they were 100% Chinook, and they've added some side dishes because of the scarcity of Chinook. That's only a theory. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just wondering if that may be. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Yes.
Hi, Howard. Michael Ma here. Michael. In the legal case, as opposed to Animal Welfare and Endangered Species Act criteria for the appeal, is there any legal teeth to having criteria be on sociological grounds? Is there any precedent for that anywhere else?
Oh boy.
And if it's sociological, is it not necessarily a violation of biological animal welfare laws, or is it now a violation of ethical or cruelty laws when it comes to captivity
Right.
from a legal perspective?
Well, I think it would have to be established in the scientific literature first. So you saw it get started right here. You know, I'd love to publish in a journal. Anyway, other questions?
Hi, Howard. As a small child, I visited one seaquarium from Miami. Back then, there was seaquarium, monkey jungle, parrot jungle, all these crazy places. All of those are gone completely. Is there any pressure from the city of Miami to actually get rid of this place? Because it's kind of embarrassing. It's in the city of Miami, isn't it?
Well, it is embarrassing, and the mayor of Miami Beach, Philip Levine, has been very vocal about how this is a disgrace to our city. We can do better than that. It's a throwback to an old age. He's fantastic, but that's Miami Beach. It is a revenue generator for Miami-Dade County. It's on county property. They pay a lease. They hire 100 people. I'm sure they're in a quandary about what to do, but you know, somebody's got to make the first move. Who has the power to do that? And we haven't seen that yet. Is that it? One up there.
So it dawned on me that the captive orchards are not eating captivity, but they're naturally eating. So that had to be quite an adaptation for them, A. And B, any word on how cement is doing in Argentina and any possibilities of, getting out of there?
Two-part question. One is that they're fed, whatever in captivity, and they eat it. So, but that's always traumatic in the beginning. If it's not, well, it's not their traditional food or way of getting it. So, there's, as I understand, after captures, there was always a week or 2 or 3 or a month when they wouldn't eat, and finally they get, so hungry, they will eat chopped up halibut, smelt, whatever they're being tossed. So they can adapt, and there's a famous story in Eric Hoyt's book about the transients, before anyone knew there were transients that ate only marine mammals, that were captured and were attempted to be fed fish, and they wouldn't eat fish for something over 60 days. There were 3 of them, and one of them died of starvation. So the other 2, a male and female, after a loud chatter of some kind, came over and grabbed a fish, the male, and took it to the female and gave it to her. Or at first, as I recall in the book, they swam the perimeter of the pen they were in, each holding one end of the fish. Then I think she ate it. Maybe they tore it apart and shared it. I'm not sure of the details, but they had to go through that sort of ritual of mutual acceptance of violating that taboo to eat, and they did. Then they got out of there and went right back to marine mammals. So that can happen. As far as Shemek, I really am not up to date. He's languishing in that tiny pool in Argentina, and I don't have any more updates. I don't know of any real, program plan to find a way to, remove him into a sea pen or back to the ocean in any way. I wish I could give you better news on him and others. I think we're set. Thank you.
Thanks, Howard. Really appreciate it. Just quickly, looking at the time, there was a possibility that we might be showing Voiceless again tonight, but given that the Line Kiln event is starting at 5, we're not going to do that. And our last presentation is going to be